when my wife's brother started using my equipment without asking. I drew the line. He said, "You think you own everything?" My wife backed him. "You're not exactly irreplaceable." That night, I unlocked my storage unit and removed everything I bought. But what I left behind was even more damaging. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope you're having a peaceful day wherever you are. If you're watching this around the holidays, especially alone, I'd love for you to share in the comments where you are and how you're spending this season. It means a lot that you're here. Now, let's begin this story together. I'm 38 years old, and I live in Yakima, Washington. For the past 11 years, I've run a custom woodworking business out of my garage. Cabinets, doors, tables, whatever people needed. I built it. I didn't inherit this trade. I didn't get a lucky break. I worked for it. Every clamp, every chisel, every machine in that garage I bought with money I earned and hands I wrecked. My garage wasn't just where I worked. It was where I solved problems, where I made something out of nothing. No one else touched that space. It wasn't ours. It wasn't the family's. It was mine. And in a house that was sometimes too loud, that garage was the one place I could breathe. Some men get loud when they're angry or proud. I don't. I build. I fix. I move quietly. People underestimate that, but there's a certain kind of strength in staying quiet until it's time not to be. I met Danica 10 years ago. She was fast to laugh, fast to talk, fast to live. She liked the way I listened. Said I made her feel steady. I didn't need to fill the air. She was happy to talk enough for both of us. Somehow, we worked. I handled the repairs, the groceries, the bills. She liked to go out. I liked to stay in. We didn't clash. We just orbit. I stayed close to the ground, and she lived a little higher up. But we made it work, or at least I thought we did. Everything I'd built, my routine, my space, my sense of purpose started to shift the day her brother Troy moved in. I didn't want it. I made that clear. Danica said he just needed a few weeks to get back on his feet. I didn't want to argue, so I agreed, but I should have trusted my gut. I had no idea how fast a few weeks could turn into the unraveling of everything I'd spent my life holding together. You can open your door to someone, but if they step into the wrong part of your life, they don't just take space, they take peace. Troy showed up with a duffel bag, no plan, and an attitude that told me he wasn't looking to start over. He was looking for a free ride. 25. Jobless. Coming off some drama in Portland. That's how Danica put it. When I asked what happened, she deflected. He just got caught up with the wrong crowd. He needs a fresh start. I didn't like it. I didn't like the vagueness. I didn't like how fast she said yes without asking me first. But I bit back my frustration and laid down one condition. This is temporary. 2 weeks, tops. She nodded like she meant it. She didn't. From day one, Troy acted like the house owed him something. Dishes in the sink, towels on the floor, groceries vanishing like smoke. He sat on our couch all day, scrolling through his phone or watching TV at full volume, while Danica defended him. He's decompressing. Give him time. I gave him time, and then I gave him space, and then he took more. I didn't realize how far he'd crossed the line until I walked into the garage one evening and noticed sawdust where it didn't belong. One of my clamps had been moved. A chisel was lying on the bench, edge first, like someone had no idea how to use it. I hadn't been in there all day. I asked Danica, keeping my voice even. Was Troy in the garage? She didn't even blink. Yeah. He's working on something, said he was just trying a little project. He borrowed a couple tools. Borrowed, I repeated. Without asking me, he's building a coffee table or something. It's harmless. Harmless. That word stuck in my throat like a nail. Let me explain something most people don't get. Woodworking isn't playtime. It's precision. It's skill. It's dangerous in the wrong hands. A bandsaw doesn't care if you're inexperienced. It'll take a finger off the same as it'll cut oak. My tools aren't toys, and they sure as hell aren't free to use just because you share a hallway. I found Troy in the kitchen that night and told him flat out, "Don't go in my garage. Don't touch anything. That space is off limits." He gave me this half smile and said, Yeah. Chill. Got it. He didn't get it. The next morning, I walked in to find one of my finishing brushes ruined, crusted stiff with dried varnish. My $100 bottle of glue was spilled and sticky across the bench. A chisel was gone. The place looked like a hurricane had blown through. I didn't yell. I just grabbed the destroyed brush, walked inside, and held it up in front of Danica. This is what harmless looks like to you. She didn't even flinch. He's trying. Why are you so upset over a brush? That's a $40 brush and half a bottle of high-grade glue. And then she said it. Flat. Cold. Like the words had been waiting. You think you own everything? I stared at her. I didn't even know what to say. That sentence alone felt like a crack down the center of my life. But she wasn't finished. Her voice dropped to a mumble, almost like she regretted saying it. But not enough to stop. You're not exactly irreplaceable. I stood there, silent. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I just felt something shift like a joint slipping out of place, subtle but irreversible. I didn't say another word. But I knew. In that moment, something had broken that wouldn't be fixed with time. When someone looks you in the eye and says you're not irreplaceable, you either break or you take a step back and decide what you're really worth. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't sleep either. I sat in the dark with her words echoing in my head, not because they surprised me, but because they didn't. That's what hit hardest. Somewhere deep down, I think I already knew she didn't value what I built, not just the tools, but the life. At 5 a.m., before the sun came up, I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and walked into the garage. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the mess Troy left behind the brush. The glue, the empty space where my chisel used to be. It didn't look like my shop anymore. It looked like a crime scene. Something sacred had been violated, and I wasn't going to let it happen again. I backed my truck into the driveway and opened the garage door. Quiet. No music. No slamming. Just a man reclaiming what was his. I started with the saws, carefully unbolting the table saw, unplugging the bandsaw, wrapping cords like I'd done 1,000 times before. Then the clamps, the routers, the jigs, the bits. Everything came off the walls, off the shelves, out of drawers. Every tool had a memory, and every memory deserved better than what it had become. 2 hours later, the garage was stripped clean, bare walls, empty hooks, cold silence. But I didn't just take everything. I left one thing behind. I drove to Marcus's print shop and asked him for a favor. An hour later, I came back with a custom sign. Big, bold, black and white. I mounted it to the garage wall with 4 screws, exactly where my bench used to be. Not yours. Then I locked the door and left for work like it was any other day. By noon, my phone lit up like a fire alarm. Texts from Danica. Missed calls. All caps. Where is all your stuff? What the hell is going on? I didn't answer. When I got home that evening, she was standing in the living room, arms folded so tight it looked like she was holding herself together. Troy was pacing behind her like a dog that senses a storm. You emptied the whole garage, she snapped. I took what belonged to me. I said, you didn't even tell me. You told me I don't own everything, so I figured I'd better hold on to what I do. Troy jumped in. Dude, you're being psycho. I barely used anything. I looked him dead in the eye. You wrecked over $300 worth of supplies in 2 days. You lied about it. You treated my shop like a playpen. He shrugged. It's just stuff. That was the problem. To him, and apparently to Danica, it was just stuff. She stepped between us. You're making this worse than it is. No, I said. What made it worse was you defending him after he crossed every boundary. I built that shop. With my hands. With my time. It was mine. And both of you disrespected that. She didn't back down. She just crossed her arms again and said it. You're not irreplaceable. Again. The second time. It didn't feel like a slap. It felt like confirmation. So I nodded once. Calm. Clear. And then I packed a bag, grabbed my laptop, and left the house without raising my voice. No threats. No screaming. Just the sound of a front door closing behind a man who'd finally decided what not to accept. I didn't leave to make a scene. I left because I had no intention of living in a house where I was treated like I didn't belong. Not by a guest, and not by my wife. Danica must have opened the garage later that morning. expecting to see the usual my saws, my clamps, the bench that held everything from her picture frames to our kitchen drawers. Instead, she saw space, just space, and bolted to the back wall. Drilled in 4 corners was the black sign I left behind, not yours. Troy, according to the messages she sent later, lost it, kicked over the empty rolling chest, punched the side of the garage door, and shouted like I'd robbed him. Robbed him? The man who never bought a single tool, never paid rent, and didn't even ask before touching what he had no right to. Danica tried calling me 5 times in an hour. I let every call go to voicemail. I wasn't hiding. I was at Marcus's print shop, where the back room had just enough space for a cot, my toolbox, and a temporary bench. It wasn't comfortable, but it was mine. I spent that morning sanding down an old tabletop that had been waiting for finishing for weeks. Oak, quarter sawn, beautiful grain. Every pass of the orbital sander slowed my thoughts down just enough to breathe again. At noon, the front door opened, and I didn't need to look. I knew it was her. Danica walked in like she was walking into an argument, not a conversation. Her arms were crossed. Her face was tight. She didn't say hello. "You emptied the whole garage?" she snapped. I didn't look up. I took back what was mine. "You didn't tell me." "You already did," I said. "You told me I don't own everything, so I decided to hold on to the things I do." She shifted her weight, clearly annoyed that I wasn't rising to her tone. "This is over a few ruined tools." "No," I said. "It's about boundaries. It's about respect. It's about you siding with someone who disrespected me in my own home and then calling me replaceable when I finally said enough. Troy didn't mean any harm. That's not good enough. This isn't about harm. It's about value. You knew what that garage meant to me. You knew what I built in it. And you dismissed it like it was clutter." She stared at the table I'd been working on, the one I was sealing with slow, practiced strokes. "You're seriously going to throw our marriage away over this?" she asked. Her voice cracked, but not from sadness, from disbelief. "I didn't throw it away," I said. "You put someone else's comfort above my work, my space, and then called me replaceable. I'm just giving you the freedom to prove it." She looked around the shop like it offended her. "You're living here now? For now? This isn't sustainable. It doesn't have to be just long enough for me to see who's still standing when the dust settles." Danica didn't have a comeback. She walked out without slamming the door, but as the bell jingled behind her, Troy's voice came shouting from the parking lot. Something about me being insane, about taking what didn't belong to me. I didn't even glance up. "Marcus, from the front desk?" muttered. "He's got it backwards." I nodded. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because I had answers, but because I'd finally stopped letting someone else define what I was allowed to protect. It didn't take long for things to spiral. By the next morning, Danica had already begun seeding our mutual group chat with carefully phrased jabs, nothing directly accusatory, but enough to make it sound like I'd overreacted, like I'd walked out of the house unprovoked over a few tools, throwing away our marriage over pride. Her messages dripped with passive aggression. Some people just don't value family. Or when someone can't even handle a temporary guest, you start to question how much they ever valued stability. It wasn't about the truth. It was about getting ahead of the narrative. Troy, of course, wasn't far behind. He posted a photo of the now empty garage, the sign "Not Yours" still bolted to the back wall, and captioned it with, "Guess some guys can't handle being challenged." Within hours, the post had been shared by a few local friends, some of whom hadn't spoken to me in years but were suddenly concerned. I didn't comment, didn't engage, and didn't correct the record. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd learned a long time ago that when people try to get louder than the truth, it's usually because they know it's coming. Still, staying silent doesn't always protect you. A neighbor messaged me privately later that day. She said she'd heard yelling in our driveway the night before, that Troy had been shouting, calling me a thief, a coward, a control freak. "Everything okay over there?" she asked. And I appreciated the concern, but I answered honestly, "I don't live there anymore." That was the only line I needed to draw. Marcus, ever the calm voice of reason, asked if I wanted to respond, maybe put out my version of events, maybe post something measured but firm. But I shook my head. Not yet. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I wasn't looking to start a war on social media. I was watching, listening, collecting. I started compiling everything: screenshots of texts from Danica and Troy, dated invoices, receipts, photos of my workspace, client contracts, tax records. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. Because something told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 days later, Danica came to the print shop again. She wasn't yelling this time. She wasn't even defensive. She just stood there, arms crossed, trying to look unshaken, and asked, "Can we talk?" I stepped out from the back, covered in dust, my hands still raw from carving a joint by hand. She looked at me like I'd turned into a stranger. "You emptied the whole garage," she said, like she still couldn't believe it was real. I nodded. "I took back what was mine," she scoffed, then muttered, "This whole thing, over a few ruined tools." I paused, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to be sure she heard every word. "No," I said. "It's about boundaries, about what you protect, about what it means when your own wife sides with someone who walked into my space, used my work, destroyed it, and then lied. And when I said I'd had enough, you said I wasn't irreplaceable. Twice." She looked like she wanted to deny it, but couldn't. Her eyes dropped. Her shoulders softened. And for the first time since this started, she didn't look angry, just confused, maybe even scared. But it didn't matter anymore, because the next thing I received wasn't an apology. It was a legal envelope. That night, I got served. Danica had filed for legal separation. Not just that she wanted half of everything. Half the house, fine. Half the savings, maybe, but also half the business, half the tools, half of the workshop lease I'd just signed under my own name. She listed assets she'd never touched, equipment she didn't even know how to name, and claimed entitlement because we were married. I stared at the papers and felt no rage, no heartbreak, just a final, cold understanding. She didn't want to fix anything. She didn't want to come back. She just wanted to own the pieces of what I'd built after tearing the whole thing apart. I took the papers, filed them neatly in a manila folder, and placed them on the workbench next to a freshly cut slab of ash. Then I got to work, not with a lawyer yet, but with my memory. I opened up every old invoice, pulled bank statements, reprinted receipts from suppliers going back nearly a decade. I'd always kept good records. I never thought I'd need them to prove ownership to my own wife. But that's exactly what I was doing now. Everything I had built, the shop, the tools, the income stream, had been mine long before Danica walked into my life. I had formed my business as a sole proprietor, filed taxes separately, even kept a clean digital trail that showed exactly where every dollar came from. She didn't know how any of it worked. She thought because we were married, she automatically had a right to it all, but she didn't. And I wasn't going to let her pretend otherwise. I met with Grant, a local attorney Marcus recommended, quiet guy, gray suit, sharp mind. He read everything I gave him without once asking a question I hadn't already prepared to answer. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapped the folder, and said, "She doesn't have a case. Honestly, she may owe you damages." That was the moment everything shifted. Until then, I'd been reacting, trying to hold my ground while they came at me. Now, I was drawing my own line in the sand. We filed a counterclaim. On paper, it was for lost income and property damage. But at its core, it was something deeper. It was a record of every boundary Troy had crossed, every time Danica had enabled it, and every dollar I'd spent cleaning up after both of them. Grant suggested we name Troy directly in the filing. I hesitated for maybe half a second. Then I said yes. He was named as a responsible party for the misuse and destruction of professional equipment. Not a casual guest, but someone who caused measurable, documented loss to a business. The moment we submitted the paperwork, the dynamic changed. Danica went silent. No more vague Facebook posts. No more texts. Just static. The kind that happens when people realize they've stepped into territory they don't understand. And then, a week later, I got the knock. Marcus called me to the front of the shop, said there was a woman asking for me, said her name was Elaine. I didn't recognize it. But when I walked out front, I saw someone who looked like she'd aged a decade in just a few years. Late 30s, short brown hair, pressed business clothes that didn't quite hide how tightly she was gripping a manila folder. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know Troy. Or I used to." She handed me the folder, and when I opened it, I felt my pulse spike. Inside were screenshots, email chains, and most importantly, court documents, 2 restraining orders, one filed in Portland, the other in Vancouver, both against Troy, both for behavior that went far beyond freeloading. "He's been doing this for a while," she said quietly. "I recognized him in a photo your wife posted a couple years back. But I saw your story about the sign going around online, and I thought you should know it was more than I expected, more than I could have asked for, but it was exactly what I needed." I thanked her, and she nodded. "He does this to people, wrecks things, then makes them feel like they overreacted for standing up for themselves." When she left, I stood there holding that folder, realizing that what I'd experienced wasn't just bad luck. It was part of a pattern, and now I had proof. I handed the documents to Grant the next day. He skimmed the restraining orders, the messages, the printouts of Troy's behavior. Then he looked at me and said, "This might not just protect you. This might change how the court sees them completely." It wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was about credibility, character, and the consequences of pretending that damage is something you can walk away from without cost. When you stop defending yourself and start building again, people notice, and not always the ones you expect. A few days after I handed over Elaine's documents to Grant, I got a message from Rick, an old client I hadn't heard from in nearly 4 years. We'd worked together on a full kitchen remodel for one of his properties, and I remembered him as a man who didn't talk much but always showed up with coffee and paid on time. He said he'd seen the story going around. Someone had shared a photo of the "Not Yours" sign online, and he recognized both the story and the style of the shop in the background. "You still building?" he asked. "I might have something for you." I met him later that week at a property he managed downtown, a narrow old building that used to be a boutique shop. It had big street-facing windows, high ceilings, and just enough grit in the brickwork to remind me why I loved working with my hands in the first place. He unlocked the front door, stepped aside, and let me walk through it alone. "You see potential?" he asked from behind me. I turned once around the room, picturing benches, clamps, and sawdust settling under those beams. "Yeah," I said. "I see it." "The rent's low," he said. "It's not much, but it's something, and I'd rather it go to someone who'll build something honest than sit empty." I signed the lease that week. With Marcus's help, I moved in a few core pieces from storage, just the essentials. My favorite clamps, my hand tools, the table saw I'd bought 10 years ago with the first full paycheck from a custom job. I didn't have the budget to kit the place out the way I wanted. Not yet, but I had enough to start. And starting felt like winning. The space came alive quickly. Not just with work, but with energy. People dropped by out of curiosity. Some to ask about the sign, others to commission small pieces, and a few just to shake my hand and say they respected how I handled everything. No shouting matches, no dirty laundry online, just a man who walked away when things stopped being respectful. Then Rick called again. "You ever thought about teaching?" he asked. I laughed. "You mean like kids?" "No, adults. Apprentices. We've got younger guys at my contracting firm who don't know the difference between a dovetail and duct tape. You could teach weekend workshops. I'd send them your way. You charge them. Everyone wins." I didn't answer right away. I'd never thought of myself as a teacher. I didn't like explaining things out loud. I liked showing them, letting hands learn what words sometimes fumble. But that idea stuck with me. Not just the income, it was the idea that maybe the shop didn't have to be a fortress. Maybe it could be a community again, one I could build, control, protect. So I cleared one corner of the new space and added a second bench, bought a few spare hand tools, drafted a basic intro course, tool safety, joinery, surface prep, posted a flyer on Facebook with a single line. Craft isn't lost. It just needs space to breathe. 12 people signed up in the first 3 days. Half were hobbyists. The other half were young guys trying to break into a trade that no one had shown them how to respect. They came in on Saturdays, quiet at first, awkward with the tools, but focused. And they listened. They listened. Not like Troy. Not like someone passing time or stealing space, but like people who wanted to earn what they touched. For the first time in months, I felt more than just relief. I felt purpose. Meanwhile, I didn't hear a word from Danica or Troy. No texts. No emails. Not even a threat. Just silence. But I knew silence didn't mean surrender. It meant something else was coming. And it did. The court date came sooner than expected, which was both a relief and a challenge. I had no desire to let this drag out for months, but standing in front of a judge with my marriage and business under scrutiny wasn't something I looked forward to. Grant kept reminding me, stay calm. Stick to facts. Let the evidence speak louder than your voice ever could. And I did. I wore clean jeans, a button-down shirt, and boots I'd polished the night before. Nothing flashy, just a man ready to account for what was his. Troy showed up in a wrinkled suit that looked borrowed. He smirked the whole time like it was a game, like we were sitting down for a petty argument instead of a legal reckoning. Danica sat behind him, tight-lipped, avoiding eye contact, arms wrapped across her chest like she was holding herself in. I didn't try to read her. I didn't need to. When it was my turn to speak, I walked the court through everything, how I'd built the business from the ground up, how my tools were purchased with personal income, how I filed taxes separately and had documentation going back more than a decade. I explained how Troy had used the space without permission, caused damage, lied about it, and how Danica had not only dismissed my concerns, but tried to claim ownership over things she had no part in building. Grant laid it all out methodically. Receipts, client contracts, dated emails, text messages, and most importantly, the restraining orders Elaine had given me. He didn't dramatize anything. He just let the truth stack up until it became too heavy to ignore. Then Troy took the stand. His story changed depending on who was asking the question. He claimed I had threatened him with a hammer, said I screamed nightly, that I hoarded tools and made the house feel like a prison. Grant asked him to name the specific tools I'd supposedly hoarded. Troy couldn't. Then Grant handed him a document, a cease and desist letter from a local business that had caught Troy trying to sell knockoffs of their custom furniture designs. Troy stammered, said it was a misunderstanding, that it wasn't real. The judge asked him directly, "Did you live rent-free in the house?" He nodded. "Did you pay for any of the tools?" He shook his head. "Were you told not to use them?" He hesitated, then muttered, "Yes." That pause said more than any testimony he'd given. Danica took the stand last. Her voice was flat, and her confidence had started to unravel. She said she didn't know about Troy's past, that she had only wanted to help him get back on his feet, that she never intended for things to fall apart. But when the judge asked about the phrase, "You're not irreplaceable," she tried to brush it off, said it was taken out of context. Grant didn't argue. He simply played the voicemail again. Her voice, her tone, her exact words. The courtroom went still. After closing statements, we were told the judge would need a few days. I walked out of the building into cold air that smelled like rain, and for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt empty, like everything had been poured out on the table, and whatever happened next, at least it would be real. No more pretending, no more silence, no more second-guessing what I had built, or why I had walked away. I didn't want revenge. I wanted resolution. But sometimes the truth carries its own weight. And this time, it was enough to crush every lie they tried to stand on. The judgment came down a week later, one envelope, delivered by certified mail, folded into 2 clean pages that weighed more than they looked. I sat in the back of the shop, the same bench where I'd glued dozens of tabletops, and read every line without rushing. Every sentence was like an exhale I'd been holding for months. The judge had ruled in my favor on every count. Danica had no legal claim to the business, the tools, or the new shop lease. The records I'd provided were clear, and the restraining orders sealed any lingering doubt about who Troy really was. The court declared the garage equipment and business assets to be mine and mine alone. But it didn't stop there. The ruling held Danica jointly liable for the damages Troy had caused, because she had knowingly allowed him access to the workspace after being told not to. And because she had minimized and excused his behavior even after it led to financial loss. The judge found that she shared responsibility, and Troy, well, he was ordered to pay $28,000 in damages to my business. The court froze his bank account, garnished future wages, and put a lien on any tax returns. He didn't have the money. Of course, he barely had a job, but the real blow came later. As part of our response to his false testimony, his story about me threatening him with a hammer, about creating a hostile living environment, Grant had quietly submitted a request that the DA review his statements for perjury. We didn't expect much to come from it. But then the court clerk called Grant, and Grant called me, and I got the news. Troy had violated an active probation order from Portland by lying under oath. 2 months later, he was arrested and sentenced to 6 months in county jail for perjury and probation violation. One more slip, and he'd be looking at prison time. Danica didn't show up at his hearing. From what I heard, she'd moved in with a cousin in Tacoma, trying to find work and distance herself from the fallout. We hadn't spoken since the day of the trial, but a few days after the verdict came through, she sent one last message. None of this would have happened if you hadn't taken the tools. I stared at those words for a long time, not because they surprised me, but because even now, even with everything laid out in court, even with proof and consequences and judgment, she still didn't see the truth. She didn't see that I hadn't started anything. I had simply drawn a line. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. But someone else did. A week later, Troy tried to start a GoFundMe to pay his court fines. The fundraiser lasted 3 days and raised exactly $37. One of the comments read, "Maybe don't steal from the guy who knows how to cut people off clean." I didn't write it. But when Marcus showed it to me, I smiled. Not because it was petty, but because it was true. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really was. It was about finally being seen, about choosing peace over proximity, about standing still when someone else keeps pushing and letting them fall on their own. I didn't destroy anyone. I just stopped letting them wreck what I built. And the moment I did, everything they leaned on collapsed. I never went back to that house. Not to pick up mail, not to talk things through, not even to grab the few things I left behind in the hall closet. What mattered was already with me. Everything else, I'd already let go. The new shop came together slowly, at first one wall at a time, one job at a time, but every screw I drilled, every tool I rehung, felt like a quiet answer to the question I'd been asked months earlier. Are you replaceable? That space answered for me. The students who showed up on weekends answered for me. The orders, the returning clients, the people who stopped by just to say they respected the sign on my wall, they all answered for me. That sign, not yours, I framed it. Just as it was, bent edges, scratches, black background with white block letters. It hung right by the front door of the shop, where sunlight hit it every morning. People asked about it all the time. Some thought it was a joke. Others thought it was a warning. But I always gave them the same answer. It's a reminder, not just about tools, not just about boundaries. It's about respect. About what happens when you stop trying to be agreeable and start protecting what's yours. Because there's a difference between being kind and being passive, between letting things go and letting yourself be erased. And sometimes, the most honest answer you can give to betrayal isn't anger. It's removal. The workshops grew. Within 2 months, I had a waiting list. People came in who had never touched a plane or a handsaw before, and they left with joints they'd cut themselves, faces covered in dust, pride in their eyes. I hired 2 assistants, 1 full-time, 1 apprentice. I cleared out the back room and turned it into a second working space. The noise came back, Sanders, routers, clamping pressure, and this time, it wasn't chaos. It was momentum. And through it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't go online to set the record straight. I didn't try to win friends back. I didn't explain or defend. The people who mattered saw the truth in how I moved forward. And the ones who didn't, they were never really in my corner to begin with. Danica never reached out again after that last message. Last I heard, she was couch surfing, job hunting, and trying to explain to people why she wasn't the victim in the story she started. Troy did his 6 months and, according to a mutual acquaintance, is now flipping burgers at a strip mall diner an hour outside town. His GoFundMe closed quietly. His name faded out of conversations just as quickly as he'd inserted himself into my life. But I remember not out of bitterness, out of clarity, because I know now that what you protect defines you. What you allow erodes you. And the moment you stop apologizing for defending your peace, that's when things start to grow again. I didn't rebuild to prove anything to them. I rebuilt because I finally stopped trying to be accepted by people who didn't respect the work. And in that silence, everything loud enough found its place. Thank you for being here and listening to my story. If you've ever had to fight quietly for what you built, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your version, and if you believe respect is earned, not given, subscribe. This space is for people like you